Hello, everybody, and welcome to the first live of season 3 for Writerly Conversations. Thank you all for joining. If you're joining on the replay, thank you so much for watching. Make sure you smash that like button, leave a comment. It is, I guess, wait, hold on. We should do intros before I just hop into it's National Poetry Month. I'm Britt. This is my channel, Brittwriterly. It's a book and author tube where I talk about the intersections of literature and culture, mainly through my Friday reading sprints where I give reading updates and go on I don't like the word rant because I feel like it undermines what's being said. I speak passionately about things that I'm reading. So you can find most of my reading updates there, and then Riley Conversations are also where I talk a lot with Shay about the intersections of literature and culture, because there's Black with a big B over there and over here. If you didn't know, now you know. And on that note, I'm gonna let Shay introduce herself.
Hey everybody, I'm Shay. Okay. Can you hear me? Okay. Hey everybody, I'm Shay. My channel is Shay with the Hobbies. I be writing, I be reading, I be creating, working on something now. So if that's something you think you could be interested in, definitely come on over to my channel. Is it a little scarce that I'm doing stuff over there right now? Yeah, a little bit, but I have been recording things over the past couple of days, so I am working on getting some stuff together to put out for you guys. It's just, taking me a little bit more time. So just continue to be patient with me, and you'll see it as it progresses. Ow. That's all I got for you.
Okay. As y'all can see, I am mukbanging this because I just came from the gym, so your girl needs to eat. Cauliflower rice. Cauliflower rice is actually good. It's like a Spanish rice cauliflower mix. And I put some shrimp in it. I'm a fan of it. It came with diced peppers and stuff. It's good. Anyway, that's what
I got questions about it because cauliflower is just one vegetable that just never grew on me from childhood to adulthood.
It didn't, but cauliflower products. Oh, my freezer is like an ode to cauliflower products now.
Really?
They have cauliflower. Yes, Shay, I gotta put you on. No, they're really good and very filling. Really? The way I'm getting a little slim in the abdominal section just from stuffing my face full of cauliflower products, I can get behind that.
Right, because I like me some pasta. So if it's like if I can choose to switch to something else, because pasta literally is probably why I can't get rid of this lower belly. It's literally probably why, honestly.
Yeah.
It's not like I even eat a lot. It's literally just that
it don't take much.
Right.
Yeah, no, I'll send you like a list of my new faves, but there's like these cauliflower balls that have bacon and cheese and peppers in them. Shay.
Interesting.
It's so good. I'm like, and this is okay for me to eat, and it is. Oh, and it doesn't even take an entire serving. It's like two servings per bag for me. So yeah, it's lovely. I'm in love with it. So I'm eating that and some frozen grapes. Hey, cool gamer, how are you? Thank you for joining us. Okay, we're gonna get right into it. This is not gonna be a super long live. We're gonna aim for an 8:30 end. So here we go. It's National Poetry Month. Excuse me. Usually, if you've been following Writerly Conversations since year 1, you know that usually we'll share our favorite poems from other poets and then share a bit of our own poetry. This month, full departure from that. We are going to be talking about, as the thumbnail sort of says, breaking poetry out of its box. So we talk a lot about genre, and we're going to be talking about how reading and writing poetry outside of poetry collections can really raise the bar on some genres that we already love. So that is what we're going to talk about. We're going to have some questions that we discuss. Y'all feel free to engage them in the chat live and on the replay. We love to know because we're correct. Okay, so question number 1. How do you define poetry? Shay, I'm gonna let you go first.
So I guess this is a really good question because I think when I was younger, I defined poetry as smaller bodies of work that had some kind of rhyming sequence to them. And now I think of poetry as smaller bodies of work that can have a rhyming sequence, a rhyming pattern or sequence to it, but most certainly usually have a cadence and are written to convey or evoke emotion in a distinct way, that is not especially found in other forms of writing. That's kind of the way in which I define it, because I feel like it is still a very broad category. I know for me, some of my stuff rhymes, some of it doesn't. Some of it is based off of the syllable count and patterns of which the words are. Some of it is a lot of repetition and repeated phrases and repeated thoughts. And some of it is specifically storytelling. And it's just the way in which the story is told that makes it poetry. And so I realize now as an adult that the way in which sometimes our beginning entry into poetry we are taught is so very confined and so very small. And the deeper that you get into poetry, especially if you are someone who falls in love with poetry, the more you realize that it is a very expansive category of writing, unlike what originally you were introduced to. So I hope that I feel like that I defined it, but that's my definition when I think of poetry. That's what I think of. So.
Yeah, I think absolutely when you like, and I think it's important, right? Like I agree that they teach us a very narrow conception of poetry, of like their haikus, their couplets, their triplets. They teach us um these very specific haikus, like these very specific kinds of poems.
Mm-hmm.
And then by the kinds of poetry, they define it. Um, as opposed to having a more affective definition that's like poetry is evocative and it like they don't teach it via like how it makes you feel. They teach it by like what it looks like and how you do particular forms of it. And I get that because it's useful, like that's part of the craft, so you do need to know that. I think foundations being a bit more formulaic or genre specific is fine, because then you are able to break the rules with intention as opposed to just being sort of undisciplined.
Right.
So I think that definitely has its place, but I agree that when we are first teaching poetry, we do define it very generically, and I mean that word both by genre and both in a way that like is kind of plain. And then the more we go into it, the more we are like, wow, poetry can do anything. And so I definitely define poetry affectively, like I by the way that it, not only by the way that it emotes, by the way that poetry is just a super playful form of writing, the way that it allows words to come together for new meanings, for three meanings, layering. Like I love poems that layer 5 meanings of one word throughout the poem and just continues to make the audience go, oh, oh, oh. Like I love that kind of wordplay that continues to reveal it.
Right.
So I think I would define poetry as emotive, as playful, and as revelatory. That poetry is a very honest form of writing. You can't really tell a lie in a poem. Like it just doesn't, it calls you to be honest. And so at least that is my experience with poetry, is that it calls you to be honest. And so that's how I would define poetry. So let me check the chat. Okay, good. I don't want to be ignoring y'all, but if you're watching in the replay, in the comments, how do y'all define poetry, and has your definition of poetry sort of expanded as you've grown, or have you been like, actually the more I grow, the more I'm like, let's keep it simple with our definition of poetry? Like,
right,
I feel that's a rare thing, but let us know if you're that rarity. We okay with that? Shay, were you about to say something?
No. I was just saying definitely, because you know how I talk about things. Always for me, things always change as I get older. Like the way I view stuff before isn't the way I view it now, and so I totally totally am curious to see if anyone else's definition or view of poetry changed as they got older.
Yeah, and I think, evolution is healthy. If you're not evolving at all in your conception of any, even like craft, like not even like worldview, like, but if your idea of craft and art is not evolving, that's equally worrisome to me as like your worldview not evolving, because I feel like those things are connected.
I agree.
Okay. Question number 2. What is your favorite example of poetry in a non-poetic genre?
So for me, it would have to be the Urban Flora EP by Alina Perez. Y'all, that EP, first of all, the quality, the production is amazing. But I have said, and I will die on the hill, that she is what a poet would sound like if they were a singer. Like if they took the time to just turn their poetry into songs. And it's not even, hey, chill out. It's not even that everything rhymes. It's not even that everything is on the same line. It's that triple entendre, that everything has double meaning. It is that it's layered on top of layer. It's that I'm saying one thing but meaning 5 different things. It's that I'm letting you into a piece of me as you hear this. Like I'm letting you into my heart, into my soul, into my mind, into my feelings, into my emotions. The way in which I deliver this piece that I am giving to you is going to evoke feelings, emotions in you. You're going to relate to this in some way. You're going to feel a way in some way. You're going to feel peaceful or happy or be like, hey, I'm vibing. Like at least one song you hear of hers is going to make you feel something. And literally one of the titles of her songs is called Make You Feel. No lie. Literally. But it's the way in which she puts words together, and I love it. I love it, and it helps that her voice is just amazing. It helps that her voice is amazing. But I fell in love with her voice and her writing in like 2014 when I first heard Fantasy off of that EP, and I've just been a fan ever since. And music is definitely a very easy one to point to, especially like songs, and especially hip hop as far as poetry goes, but also in the way that like I don't consider every R&B song poetry. I don't consider every soulful song poetry. So listening to her, I believe that if you after hearing me speak about her, if you were to go listen to the EP, you would be able to be like, I see exactly what you're saying. This isn't the same kind of thing. This isn't the same type of feeling. It's not just a song, if that makes sense. And that's one of my favorite examples.
Yeah, no, I love her, and her voice is very, it's so calming. Her voice is like its own mood. It's very sultry, but not sultry in like an erotic way, just sultry, like she is bringing you into her mood with her voice, like it's setting the tone. I love it.
It's not,
Make You Feel is a good one. Also present.
It's like in between jazz and neo soul. Like it's like in between those two, because it's not like exactly quite either to me, but it fits so nicely. Like I love it.
I do like her a lot.
Man, I also love any collab she does with Black. I always love it, but I almost love any collab he does with anybody. Like I just love like the songs and the people he chooses to do songs with are so similar to him, and he's a very hip hop poetic rapper. He's a very poetic person as well, and so I think it makes sense that he collabs with so many other poetic artists as well.
Yeah, I'm gonna actually go in the opposite direction. So one of my favorite examples of poetry and non-poetic genre, even though it's completely beyond me, like I write poetry, I can even sing on a good day. What I cannot do is like for real dance, but I love dance that just looks like poetry. Like that
poetry in motion.
It's so like fluid, it's interpretive, it's evocative, like it's everything that poetry is. It's honest. And I think maybe I'm thinking about dance so much because I'm reading an arc of When It All Stinks Up by Maya Angelou, and the character is she's classically trained in ballet, but at this school she's going through to, she's taking a modern dance class, and it's at the beginning of each class they sit down. Yeah, it's completely opposite. At the beginning of each class they like sit down and have to meditate on an emotion and then dance that emotion, and she's really struggling with like coming away from the reserve and cool and the like the reserve of ballet into the emotion of modern. And so I when I see someone like Alvin Ailey, I think, like watching Alvin Ailey dance, you don't even have to know him or his repertoire, or like you don't have to know any of his other stuff. Just watching him, you're like it penetrates your heart. And so I love watching embodied poetry. I think it is so poignant and just such an example of the breadth and depth of possibility of a human body that is willing to be both disciplined and vulnerable. I really love it.
I think that was a great answer, honestly. Like a really good answer. I like that one.
Speaking of poetry outside of poetry, what are your favorite examples of poetic writing in novels, and what it adds to your reader experience?
So obviously The Poet X is a novel in verse, so I love it. And I prefer the poem at the end that can be read backwards and forwards, and it can be read as like this line as this poem, and this one is this poem. That one, I prefer that the one that could be read that way. I think it's not I prefer, like it's like I don't like the other poems. I just love the versatility of the poem and the fact that she included a poem that could teach a lesson in her book. Like, hey, this is this type of poem and it can be read this way. And then, like, I just thought that was very, I thought that was very cool. But in a book that isn't a novel in verse, I think it would have to be the poetry in Redemptor and Raybearer through the like chants and songs that happen. Because they tell story, they tell a story and a history that you get that isn't just a part of Terasai's story. So when you're not really paying attention and you're just being introduced to the story, you're not realizing that the songs that she's hearing outside of Pakina House are about the life she is going to live and about where she is going to go. And to her, they just sound like kid songs. But the reason her mother didn't want her to hear them and didn't want to sing them is because of what was going to happen. But again, it doesn't seem like it's as big of a deal or is as important. It's just this cute part. And especially if you don't hear the audiobook like, you know, we did and listen to the audiobook, and it gives you this moment of significance because you get to hear it sung. So I loved it being used as a information source. I loved it being used as a break from the traditional form of the storytelling that the author was using. I love that it was also a way to add light to the story, because every time they were introduced, even in Redemptor, it was like a celebration. It was like something positive, even when it didn't feel that way for Terasai. So even when the kids in Redemptor are singing a praise to her, it doesn't make her feel that way, but it's still there to convey. So I feel like I'm rambling, but that's just one of my favorite examples of how Jordan Foyko uses that in that story. I think it definitely enhanced the experience, especially the audiobook experience, but I think definitely for sure if you're reading it as well physically.
Yeah, I think the word I would use is that it adds texture to the story.
I can get it. Yeah.
Yeah,
And you don't think about, I said, I would agree that's a good word. And you don't think about that in the context of books, like texture.
Yeah.
I think that's a great word. You got some fire bangers tonight. You want little tidbits. I like this. I like it.
Literature is my area of study. But yeah, I agree. I didn't even think about when I asked this question, I wasn't even thinking about Redemptor, but as soon as you said like Redemptor River, I was like, that's a good one. That is a good, and I feel like honestly, whenever I read a book and it strikes me as poetic, that is what makes it like a 5-star love raving book hangover thing for me. It's not just the story being good, it's not just the world building being good, it's the writing tasting a little bit like poetry. And the way that Jordan Ifueko does that sort of like hiding important plot things in songs is very much reminiscent of what Toni Morrison did in Song of Solomon, because the song that these kids are singing is the information that the protagonist needs to find his way home to this treasure and like all these different things. So I think also when I see a book that takes seriously and makes important this different medium of storytelling that is poetry, I also really appreciate that. I have 3 favorite examples of poetic writing in novels. So I'll start with, let me see, I'll try to do them in order, but like maybe it doesn't necessarily matter. So first, Beast of Prey by Ayanna Gray. First of all, who's surprised? None of y'all. But if you saw my live tweet thread on Twitter, you know that it's the writing of this book that just had me swooning. It's the writing that took it to another level. And there's not even like a bunch of songs in here. Like it's not a novel in verse. Like of the ones that of the 3 that are my favorite, this one is the least, I would say, recognizably poetic, but it's just her intense attention to word choice that strikes me as poetic, because it seems like the words are so beautiful that they, to me, carry, if not a poetic, at least her words seem like their own aesthetic. And to that extent, I connect that with poetry, where the words themselves are very particularly and intentionally chosen for the use of rhyme and meter and rhythm and those sorts of things. And that same intentionality of poetry I see in Beast of Prey. So this is my first one. And then my second one is This Is How to Stay Alive.
Oh, okay. Never mind.
The one you're thinking is coming.
Yeah, I was like, no surprise there, because I remember that one, but no surprise here either.
Yeah, if you have read And This Is How to Stay Alive, you know that this book is very, very, very poetic. And also it's the word choice. It's also the structure. So I think certain choices can be poetic. So the protagonist, Neo Kabi, has a POV. Her brother Baraka has a POV, and then Time has a POV. That to me is quite a poetic choice, because I think one of the things that poetry is able to do is give voice to situations that we don't often think deeply about, and having us think about them in different ways. I think poetry also gives voice.
One of the huge hallmarks of poetry is personification as well. So that's
right. And then giving voice to things that don't often get to speak, like via personification. And so I think that this is just such a poetic choice to me, to give Time a POV, and not like a super short one. Like Time has as long a POV as Neo Kabi and Baraka. And so the choices that Shingai makes, I find so poetic, and she is a poet also. And so I am not, it's not a stretch to read poetry in her work, because she is a poet, and her poetry has been published, I think, in journals. So yeah, This Is How to Stay Alive, super, super poetic book. And I think that the poetry allows Shingai to tell the story that could be this long. The poetry allows her to do so much work in this amount of story. And I think that's what another thing that poetry does, is allow you to say so much with a little bit
it's
less.
So little. I totally agree with that. Yeah, because just because they're shorter words doesn't mean that the meat of them is not there.
Right. There's definitely a lot to chew on to try to stay alive, and it feels like it couldn't even have been longer than it was. Like, it feels like you have had a complete and total story, and you need it to like stop so you can start digesting. And the poetry really, really just helps bring this difficult content, not in a palatable way, but it's just beautiful. It's beautifully written, it's beautifully structured, and the intentionality is very clear. And all of those things to me sing of poetry. And then the final one that Jay was probably expecting is The Undead Truth of Us by Brittany F. Lewis. First of all, obviously the intent is to bring forth a high aesthetic of art, because we have some Van Gogh-esque-ness on the cover. So I like poetry is just there. And then it is the way that she writes it. Again, goes to the choices that she makes in her sentences.
Yeah, no, as soon as you said intentionality during that one, I knew, because I was like, nah, every voice note was about like, if chef's kiss, if all of this is on purpose, if all of this is on purpose, this is the best thing. And I was like, I just can't wait for it to get to the end, because I don't know, because I'm not reading it yet. So I can't wait to find out.
So good. So good. And I think also one of my favorite things about poetry is that it does play with grammar, that you don't have to be conventional. You're not expected to be conventional. The ways that you are unconventional are exciting and applauded. And Brittany is definitely unconventional in the grammar, and she normalizes her lack of convention. She normalizes it. It's a little unsteadying at first,
but by the end of the book, you're used to it.
You're used to it, and you appreciate the significance of it. And I think that's the way that she uses poetry to make you comfortable with breaking convention, and then make you read into that lack of convention, and then get something that get a third layer of meaning from the story, thinking about like ontology, or thinking about being. And so the Undead Truth of Us, as I lovingly call it, Tutu, is definitely, I would not ever be able to talk about a non-poetry poetic book without mentioning Tutu, because it is so self-consciously, even like it's so self-consciously poetic. Like everything about it is an aesthetic choice that points to abstraction, and poetry does that so well. It makes things abstract, and then it tweaks it a little bit, and everything comes into really sharp focus. And that's what Brittany does so well in Tutu. So those are my 3 favorite examples of poetic writing and novels, and it stretches my mind to receive a different level of understanding for the character. Is how it adds to my reader experience. I think it adds to the texture and makes me think a little bit more about like, I wonder why that choice was. So it gets me thinking about like the story as an artistic work, and then it also helps me to just care more about the emotional register of the character. So it just adds so much for me as a reader. And then our final question of the evening: how does being a poet impact your fiction writing?
You want to go first this time? I want to first on all the other ones.
Sure, I will just keep talking. Poetry impacts my fiction writing in some of the same ways that I admire poetry impacting Tutu and Beast of Prey and This Is How to Stay Alive. Is that it does add texture to my writing. Sometimes the impact is that it makes my writing longer, because if I'm not writing an actual poem, I get very like flowery and metaphor and simile heavy. I mean, my critique partners are like, take it out, and I take it out. But it definitely adds a lot of description to my writing, for sure. Yeah, it adds description and texture, I think, more than anything. And sometimes, and I think this will just continue, like as my writing just continues to grow and evolve, sometimes I do hit that beautiful note of the poet, of this, like, of my poetic writing, making readers feel like they are just closer to the characters, like they understand the characters' emotions more. That wasn't always the result. The result used to just be that it would make my sentences unnecessarily long. But I think in being more intentional about the way that poetry comes into my writing, I've been able to get more at this like beautiful, voluptuous, lush, just like setting description, and also a wider view of characters' interiority without seeming to overwhelm the reader. And I like that I like that direction that it's going.
Were you done? I don't want to. Okay. I was making sure. Okay. So for me, I would say similarly. I think that two ways in which for me is I think it makes it easier for my characters to be believable. I think that because poetry requires me to be in tune with my emotions and just with being able to convey emotions properly, it makes it very easy for like the most believable part of my story to be the character and how they're feeling. Like I feel like that's the one thing I don't think I've ever really gotten complaints about my story is about like, nah, your characters feel real. Their voices are distinct. They don't feel like any other person. And I think that's because of just poetry is again so much of emotions and being able to put emotions to words. And I think that to me is all is makes at least the very basis of good character writing. I think in stories, and I think that's part of the reason why sometimes characters fall flat, is that the emotions that people writers are trying to convey with them, they're not as good at showing. And then the other way, again, I would agree with descriptions. I feel like it's really hard for me to like rein in description sometimes because poetry makes you want to describe not just how something looks but how something feels, how something smells, how something sounds. And when I am reading, I am the type of person that I want to be able to picture myself in that scene. And so when I'm writing, I do the same thing. And sometimes that can be very overwhelming to the reader. It can be very unnecessary to the reader. And, you know, like some people have the issue with white room syndrome. I'm not one of those people. Not at all one of those people. Like you're gonna know what's on the wall, what's around, what people are wearing. And it might, and for the most part, it may seem like it doesn't matter, but I'm pretty good about like, nah, I remember what my characters are wearing and why they're wearing and da da da. So it does have a purpose, but it doesn't mean it has a purpose for the reader. And that's something that like poets in fiction you got to be mindful of. You got to be mindful of where you can go overboard a little bit. But I don't think it takes away from my writing in any way. I think it just makes it better. I think it makes it fuller for me. And honestly, I think it's what makes me like fiction writing, because I've said plenty of times poetry has and always will be my first love. It was the first type of writing that I did. It is always the easiest form to go back to. It is always when I am in my lowest form and fiction writing is not happening. I can write a poem. You know, when I need to come out of a dark place, I can write a poem. And so I feel like it's only natural that it made its way to my fiction writing. Right. It's only natural that it impacted it. And I like it. I like it. I like it a lot. I agree that it does make things longer though. It does make things longer. And I think because, and we've said this before, poetry is so personal. And I think because poetry is personal, it does make it harder to detach yourself from fiction writing when the poetry becomes an integral part of it. Because again, like for me, y'all know how I am about traditional publishing and writers and the things that they do. I don't want to be so attached to my fiction writing that I can't accept critique. I can't accept acknowledgement that I may not have put my best foot forward, or I did put my best foot forward and it just wasn't enough. And so that is where I try to be more mindful of how much my poetry is impacting. Because yeah, poetry, you can't tell me nothing about any poem that I write. Like you could, but it what? You gonna tell me my feelings are, I mean, I guess, but I'm not gonna hear you because it's how I feel. It's my emotions, it's what I needed to get out, right? But in fiction writing, in my opinion, again, this is not for anybody else, I don't want my fiction writing to be as emotional as that. I don't want it to be as hard on my sleeve as that, So, yeah, those are the ways in which poetry can impact, or does impact my fiction writing.
Also, because like the fiction that we're writing is not necessarily our story the same way that poetry is just
in our story.
us.
Exactly. Totally.
So yeah, I agree. I definitely detaching from it and being open to like, even if I do write, even if I do have a character who is a poet who writes a poem, I still have to be open to getting critique on that character's poem in a way that may be less inviting of feedback on my own poem. It's just me about me writing as me, right? So yeah, I definitely think there's just a natural distance for me that occurs when the poetry comes into the writing, whether it's on purpose or by accident. I feel less precious about it. I appreciate it for what it adds, and if it's like, oh, this actually is becoming like, it's kind of taking me out, then I'm easier to like rip it up and start building.
Right, I gotta start over because this is mine. This is not the characters. That's not the same thing.
So yeah, right. Definitely that. And actually, one of my critique partners, she is really, really good at making detail poetically important. Like, there's always some emotion. So like, if she's walking into a room, she will describe that room through the emotion of the character. Like, oh, it smells like mommy's cooking, or the like in this spice, like, or oh, this dress that she's wearing, and then we'll get a memory of the dress and why it's making her feel so. Like, with the descriptions are so, because what I feel like sometimes is like when I'm describing something, I'm like, I'm not even gonna remember this. So like, is it important for a character or like a reader? But I remember what her characters are wearing because what her characters wear is important to her characters. And so, like, even if it's like her character is wearing an all black jumpsuit, like, oh, well, she always wears that because she doesn't feel like trying or because she doesn't feel like she's pretty. Like, it's characteristically important to that person. Where I just feel like I'm like, I mean, jeans and a t-shirt, I don't know. So I also learned from reading people's work who feels a little bit poetic, a way to make the poetry that much more significant, and in the more mundane details. So yeah. Craft Blend, hello. Excited for this topic. We are actually done. We are actually done. Listen, we told y'all on Monday, yesterday evening, we were like, don't be late. Because we're going to be in and out like the burger joint, honey. Don't be late.
The burger joint, in and out like the burger joint.
And we are women of our word. We have 4 questions. We allotted time for y'all to be here talking us up in the chat. That didn't happen, so we in and out like the burger joint. And that's fine. That's fine. We're glad that you're here. Cool Gamer, thank you. Craft Blend, thank you. Ghost Watchers that I see watching, thank you.
We appreciate all of y'all.
We sure do. And then just watch the replay, and we want to hear your responses to all the questions, just like that. Shay, do you have anything you want to say before we?
No, because y'all might hold me to it. So nah, I got nothing to say. I got nothing to say. Nah.
Okay.
Friday, right? Friday.
She said no, it's a trap. So thanks. I'm good.
We'll see you on Friday, right? For Friday. We'll see them Friday for Friday.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Okay. Yeah, we'll see the Lord willing, the creek don't rise. We will see y'all on my channel at 10 a.m. Eastern Standard Time to 12 p.m. You can be a little tardy to that if you want to. We'll be there until 12. So yeah, thank y'all so much for joining. Thank you for watching us live. Thank you for rewatching. Make sure you smash that like button, and we will see y'all around. Bye.